2025 should be remembered as another triumphant year for horror, thanks to films like Weapons, Sinners and Frankenstein. Even though these fright fests got a lot of buzz, each of them managed to meet or surpass the wildest expectations. Of course, last year also saw its fair share of duds. Now, some entries on this list aren't god-awful, but they still prove to be anticlimactic, especially if they had franchise potential, were overseen by big-shot directors, or were based on a beloved property. If the movie in question was supposed to conclude an IP or kickstart a new one, it amplifies the disappointment exponentially. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and let's take a look at the most disappointing horror movies of 2025. Starting with The Conjuring: Last Rites. The Conjuring universe has earned almost $3 billion across its 9 movies, making it the highest-grossing horror franchise of all time. As a result, anticipation was high for The Conjuring: Last Rites, since it served as the series' final chapter. For now, at least. But instead of delivering a powerful climax, Last Rites felt like a tired retread. Rather than basing the story on any of Ed and Lorraine Warren's paranormal investigations, the creators invented a supernatural plot from scratch. Even though their imaginations could have run wild, Last Rites centers around an evil mirror, a trope that's already been done in plenty of horror features over the years, such as Oculus and Mirrors. What's worse is that Last Rites trades the slow burn tension and grounded sense of dread of its predecessors for bombastic scares. Rather than building emotional stakes, the narrative rushes from one haunting sequence to the next, leaving character development behind. Though the Warrens used to be the emotional anchor of the Conjuring films, they've been reduced to symbols of the franchise rather than fully realised characters, making it difficult to care about the outcome. Last Rites isn't a complete disaster, but depressingly formulaic for the supposed culmination of the Conjuring saga. Clown in a Cornfield. With a title like Clown in a Cornfield, this adaptation of Adam Caesar's novel should have embraced the absurdism and campiness of slashers like Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Instead, it attempts to be a serious horror and a tongue-in-cheek B-movie, failing to fully commit to either style. Clown in a Cornfield tries to comment on generational conflict and economic decay, but never digs deeper than surface-level cliches. The kids versus adults angle is introduced and then mostly ignored in favour of long-winded chases and kills that can be seen coming a mile away. The big bad, Friendo the Clown, is another letdown. He lacks visual flair, personality or menace, making him come across like a discount Pennywise. The kills are serviceable but rarely inventive, which is a major sin in a genre that lives or dies by memorable moments. Worst of all, Clown in a Cornfield never feels fun enough to justify its simplicity, or scary enough to excuse its lack of ambition. It's not awful, but painfully average, and in the world of modern horror, average is the real killer. Fear Street Prom Queen. Based on R.L. Stine's teenage slasher book series, the Fear Street trilogy landed on Netflix in 2021 and was such a hit that 3 more movies were planned out, with Fear Street Prom Queen hitting the streaming service in 2025. However, given the lukewarm reception to Fear Street Prom Queen, the plug might well get pulled on the next 2 films. Even though the previous 3 Fear Streets showed off innovative bloodshed, interconnected subplots, and a pulpy love for the genre, Prom Queen is the most bare-bones slasher imaginable. The kills are uncreative and tame, often cutting away before things get grisly, and this is more disheartening when compared to the over-the-top gore of its predecessors. Even if the death sequences were up to standard, viewers wouldn't care since Fear Street Prom Queen's characterization is virtually non-existent. The rivals and love interests are sketched so thinly that it's challenging to stay invested, and attempts at social commentary about popularity and cruelty are superficial, to the point where it feels like they were included out of obligation. In a nutshell, Prom Queen doesn't understand what made the earlier films special. For this reason, even the biggest Fear Street fans should give this clunker a miss. Hell House LLC Lineage. In the first Hell House LLC, a documentary team investigates a haunted hotel attraction that suffered a malfunction that resulted in 15 deaths. As the crew delves into the establishment's history, they learn the tragedy was no accident. That found footage horror was well received, inspiring the creator, Stephen Cognetti, to turn Hell House into a franchise. Even though the first 2 sequels tied up all loose ends, Cognetti expanded the brand with a prequel called Hell House LLC Origins: The Carmichael Manor in 2023. And while horror franchises can quickly run out of steam, Origins was arguably the best entry yet, indicating that the Hell House brand was still going strong. That's why it's particularly frustrating to learn that the series' latest outing, Hell House LLC Lineage, is a steaming pile of you-know-what. While earlier entries used lo-fi found footage techniques to build atmosphere, Lineage feels overly polished. Instead of enriching the lore, the horror is buried under exposition dumps that drain any potential tension. Rather than letting scenes breathe, Lineage relies on forced boo moments and intrusive sound design, which is more desperate than frightening. What should have been a haunting continuation plays like a lazy rehash, since Lineage is concerned with retelling the same stories instead of trying something new. Until Dawn. In the Until Dawn video game, 8 friends are staying in an isolated cabin when they discover they're being targeted by a serial killer. To survive the night, the player must make use of the time loop mechanics and a butterfly effect system. Not every video game concept translates to the big screen, but Until Dawn could work since it's an original concept that embraces the slasher genre. And when the man behind Lights Out and Annabelle creation, David F. Sandberg, signed on to direct, the project appeared to be in safe hands. Sadly, this adaptation of Until Dawn is more disappointing than the 2024 video game remake. While the premise promises choice-driven horror, the film just feels like a run-of-the-mill slasher, as what should have felt personal and nerve-wracking plays out like a checklist of genre cliches. Until Dawn has neat visuals, but they're undermined by uneven pacing and a reliance on darkness to mask uninspired set pieces. The mythology, which is the backbone of the plot, is rushed and underexplained, stripping it of mystery and impact. Although Until Dawn could have worked as an ongoing movie franchise, this misfire may have killed any chance of this story continuing. Alpha. After the success of Julia Ducournau's Raw and Titan, the French director proved to be one to look out for when it came to body horror. As such, there was hype for her next project, Alpha, which fixates on a 13-year-old who finds herself gradually turning to marble after contracting a blood-borne disease. Rather than going full horror, Alpha plays out more like a psychological drama. Although this approach is intended to ground the fantastical concept in reality, it's disappointing to see the film not fully embrace its weirdness. Themes surrounding prejudice and stigma are explored, but never enough to leave a lasting impression. The titular character is undergoing a terrifying and almost mythical transformation, but there's rarely any sense of the abject terror she should be experiencing. Strong performances aside, Alpha struggles to balance its ambitions with clear storytelling, so it ultimately comes across like a missed opportunity. Stranger still, the plot unnecessarily jumps between 2 timelines, creating a tone that's more muddled than layered. Let's just hope Julia Ducournau gets back on track and that Alpha isn't a sign her creative juices have run dry. Him. Produced by Jordan Peele, Him was heavily marketed as a sharp, unsettling descent into obsession and masculinity. The supernatural horror follows a promising young quarterback who's trained by a legendary player, Isaiah White, unaware of how much he must sacrifice to achieve his dream. Him tries so hard to blend psychological terror with social commentary, but the result is bafflingly ridiculous. Characters behave less like people and more like mouthpieces for poorly explored themes. Motivations shift without logic, emotional beats land with a thud, and moments intended to shock often provoke fits of laughter. By the final act, Him abandons any pretense of subtlety, delivering blunt symbolism that borders on parody. The ensemble gives it their all, especially Marlon Wayans as Isaiah, but the intense performances ironically add to the unintentional comedy. Wayans acts like he's going for an Academy Award, which makes it more ludicrous to watch him suck a pistol or scream, "I am football," with utter conviction. There are great ideas buried here, which makes it all the more disappointing to see how badly they were mishandled. Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Based on the poor reception of the first Five Nights at Freddy's movie, nobody should have expected the follow-up to be any better, but fans of the murderous animatronics weren't ready to give up on the film franchise after one lousy adaptation. The first installment laid the groundwork, allowing the sequel to incorporate the strongest elements from the games. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 had an impressive cast, bringing in Wayne Knight, McKenna Grace, and Skeet Ulrich, reuniting with his Scream co-star Matthew Lillard. On top of that, Scott Cawthon was the sole writer this time around, so the sequel should have nailed the spirit of the game. Unfortunately, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 doubled down on every criticism its predecessor received, including incoherent storytelling and thin characterization. Also, it's insulting how this adaptation cannot replicate the jump scares of the source material, no matter how hard it tries. Weirder still, the film feels like it was designed to piss everyone off, regardless of their understanding of the property. The heavy lore is barely explained, making it impossible for casuals to follow. Anyone well-versed in the Five Nights franchise will be left just as annoyed, since the sequel simplifies or contradicts the established backstory. Even though Five Nights at Freddy's 2 earned enough to warrant a threequel, expectations should be at an all-time low. Wolfman. Even though a new Wolfman take had many false starts over the years, it looked like things were finally coming together when Lee Whannell agreed to helm the project. Whannell had already showcased his ability to modernize a universal monster story with his terrific Invisible Man adaptation. And with the Australians' history of churning out hugely lucrative horror franchises like Insidious and Saw, 2025's Wolfman was shaping up to be the next big thing. Instead, the supernatural horror was a howling failure due to its shallow characterization, wooden acting, and non-existent atmosphere. Now, these criticisms could be slightly forgiven if the film nailed its biggest selling point: the werewolf. Ironically, the lethal lycanthrope is the worst aspect of the movie. Saying our hero transforms into a monster is a stretch, since his werewolf form barely has any fur. Without exaggerating, some regular people have more hair than this so-called creature of the night, and the design is so half-assed that out of context, viewers genuinely couldn't tell that it's supposed to be a mythological beast. Though Wolfman could have given the classic property a resurgence, this adaptation single-handedly killed any interest in the IP for at least another decade. And finally, I Know What You Did Last Summer. 2025's I Know What You Did Last Summer is a frustrating reminder that not every horror property benefits from being resurrected. At first, it was exciting when it was announced that the whodunit slasher franchise was receiving a soft reboot, considering the original movie helped revitalize the subgenre during the 1990s. Better still, Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. signed on to reprise their roles of Julie James and Ray Bronson, respectively. Despite a glossy production and an effort to modernize the narrative, the 2025 film feels hollow, trading suspense and atmosphere for ineffective scares and shallow nostalgia. What once worked as a tight, paranoia-driven slasher has been stretched thin by a bloated runtime and an over-reliance on callbacks. However, the reboot's most unforgivable sin is the fact that Ray is revealed to be one of the killers. Now, in theory, having an OG hero turn villainous should be compelling, yet this decision ruins the character, especially since the motivation behind Ray's heel turn is extremely weak. If this legacy sequel had told a gripping story, it could have revitalized the franchise. Instead, 2025's I Know What You Did Last Summer was such a disgrace that it may have killed the brand for good.